For decades, you've been warned. The mark of the beast is coming. A microchip under your skin, a barcode on your hand, a digital ID that will track every purchase you make. Pastors have preached it, websites have screamed it, and millions of Christians live in quiet fear of accidentally receiving it. But here's what almost no one has told you. The mark of the beast wasn't a prophecy about future technology. It was a code name for a man who ruled Rome, a man whose name, when you calculate it using an ancient cipher, adds up to exactly 666. And in some of our oldest manuscripts, the number isn't 666 at all. It's 616. Two different numbers, same man. Both calculations work. This isn't speculation, it's mathematics. And the first Christians weren't watching for the mark of the beast. They were already being forced to choose it every single day. To understand what the mark really was, we need to start with a single Greek word that modern translations have softened beyond recognition. When Revelation 13:16 describes people receiving a mark, the Greek word is charagma. And in the first century, charagma didn't mean what we think of when we hear mark. It wasn't a stamp on a package or a logo on a product. Charagma was violent, permanent. It was the word used for branding cattle, for searing ownership into the flesh of slaves. When a Roman slave bore a charagma, everyone who saw it knew immediately, this person is property. They belong to someone else. Their body carries the name of their master. So when John writes that the beast causes all people to receive a charagma on their right hand or forehead, his readers didn't think barcode. They thought slave brand. They heard the text saying, "The beast wants to own you." Accepting this mark means becoming his property. But there's another layer here that most teaching misses entirely. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, God gave Israel the Shema, the foundational confession of Jewish faith. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." And then God commanded, "You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes." Devout Jews took this literally. They wore tefillin, small leather boxes containing these scriptures, strapped to their left hand and their forehead during prayer. It was a daily physical act of declaring allegiance to YHWH. Now look again at Revelation 13:16. The mark goes on the right hand or the forehead, the exact same locations. John's Jewish Christian readers would have recognized this instantly. The mark of the beast is an anti-Shema, a satanic parody. Where God said, "Bind my words to your hand and forehead as a sign of loyalty to me," the beast says, "Bind my mark to your hand and forehead as a sign of loyalty to me." The forehead represents the mind, your beliefs, your worldview, your ultimate allegiance. The hand represents action, your labor, your work, your economic participation. The mark isn't a hidden microchip you might accidentally receive. It's a conscious declaration of ownership. Just as wearing tefillin was an intentional daily act of devotion to God, receiving the mark is an intentional act of devotion to the beast. And this wasn't abstract theology for the original readers. The 7 churches this letter addressed, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, were real congregations in real cities in Asia Minor. When this letter was read aloud in their gatherings, They weren't wondering about events 2,000 years in the future. They were living under Roman pressure right now. The mark wasn't a prediction. It was their daily reality. But who was the beast demanding this allegiance? John gives us a mathematical clue, and to solve it, we need to learn an ancient code. Revelation 13:18 doesn't hide its intention. Listen to what it actually says. Here is wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Calculate. That's a math word. John is issuing a direct challenge to his readers. This is a code, and I expect you to break it. He's not describing some mystical symbol that will appear in the distant future. He's giving them a puzzle they can solve right now, if they have wisdom. That word, wisdom, is important. In Jewish apocalyptic literature, wisdom often served as a signal. Think in Hebrew. And that makes sense when you understand how ancient numbering worked. In the ancient world, there were no separate symbols for numbers like we have today. No 1, 2, 3. Instead, letters served double duty as numerals. In Greek, alpha equaled 1, beta equaled 2, gamma equaled 3, and so on. Hebrew worked the same way. Aleph was 1, bet was 2, gimel was 3. This meant that every word had a numerical value. You could add up the letters of any name and get a number. The practice was called gematria in Hebrew or isopsophy in Greek. And it wasn't esoteric or rare. We have ancient graffiti from Pompeii where someone wrote, "I love her whose number is 545." This was common knowledge, everyday code making. So when John says, calculate the number, his readers knew exactly what to do. Take a name, transliterate it into letters with numerical values, add them up. But why would John use a code at all? Why not just write the name plainly? Because John was writing from Patmos, a Roman penal colony. He was a prisoner of the empire. If he wrote, Emperor Nero is the beast from the sea in plain Greek, that letter would never reach the churches. It would be seized as treason, and John would likely be executed. But by encoding the name in Hebrew gematria, John created a message that Jewish Christians could decode easily, while Roman censors would see only a meaningless number. The name hidden in that number? Nero Caesar. Let's do the math. The overwhelming consensus among biblical scholars and historians is that 666 refers to Nero Caesar. Nero ruled Rome from AD 54 to 68. He was the first emperor to systematically persecute Christians, blaming them for the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64. According to early church tradition, both Peter and Paul were martyred under his reign. For the early church, Nero wasn't just a bad emperor. He was the embodiment of satanic opposition to Christ. Here's how the calculation works. The Greek spelling of his name was Neron Kaiser, with a final N. To encode this in Hebrew, you transliterate the Greek letters into their Hebrew equivalents. Since Hebrew doesn't write vowels, you get Nun Resh Vav Nun for Neron, and Kof Samech Resh for Kaiser. Now we add up the numerical values. Nun equals 50, Resh equals 200, Vav equals 6, Nun again equals 50. That's Neron, totaling 306. Kof equals 100, Samech equals 60, Resh equals 200. That's Kaiser, totaling 360. Add them together, 306 plus 360 equals 666. Nero Caesar, transliterated from Greek into Hebrew, equals exactly 666. This isn't numerological gymnastics. This isn't forcing letters to fit. This is the straightforward calculation that John's original readers, Jewish Christians familiar with both Greek and Hebrew, could perform. The math works. The history fits. Nero was the beast terrorizing the churches when Revelation was being written or remembered. But here's where skeptics have raised an objection for centuries. Some of our ancient manuscripts don't say 666. They say 616. If the Bible can't even agree on the number, how can we trust any interpretation? Actually, that variant doesn't disprove the Nero theory. It proves it. Some of our oldest and most important manuscripts of Revelation record the number of the beast not as 666, but as 616. The most significant is Papyrus 115, a fragment dating to the late 3rd or early 4th century, making it one of our earliest witnesses to this text. The church father Irenaeus, writing around AD 180, was already aware that some copies read 616. For years, critics pointed to this as evidence of scribal confusion or biblical unreliability. They couldn't even get the number right. But here's what those critics missed, and what transforms this variant from a problem into proof. In the Greek-speaking eastern part of the Roman Empire, the emperor's name was spelled Neron, with a final N. But in the Latin-speaking western part of the empire, the spelling was simply Nero, without the final N. Watch what happens to our calculation. When you transliterate the Latin spelling Nero Caesar into Hebrew, you drop that final noon, and the numerical value of noon is 50. 666 minus 50 equals 616. A scribe in the Latin-speaking West, copying Revelation for a congregation that knew the emperor as Nero rather than Neron, adjusted the number so the code would still work for his audience. He wasn't corrupting the text. He was preserving the meaning across languages. Think of it like forensic evidence. We have two independent witnesses, two manuscript traditions from different parts of the ancient world. Both record a number. Both numbers, calculated through valid linguistic paths, point to the exact same man. The probability of this being coincidence is statistically negligible. This is the DNA evidence of biblical interpretation. Two numbers, two spellings, one emperor. Scholars have known this for centuries. Textual critics teach this in seminary classrooms around the world. And yet, somehow, this evidence rarely makes it into the sermons warning you about barcodes and microchips. Let that sink in. The code was cracked almost 2,000 years ago. The question is, why did we forget? So we know who the beast was. Nero Caesar, the persecutor of the early church, whose name calculated to 666 in Hebrew gematria. But what was the mark? How did the inability to buy or sell actually work in the 1st century? The answer isn't a microchip. It's a guild card. The 7 churches of Revelation were located in some of the most prosperous trade cities of the ancient world. Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira. These were commercial hubs where fortunes were made and goods flowed across the Mediterranean. And in these cities, economic life was controlled by one institution, the trade guild. The Romans called them collegia. There were guilds for almost every profession you can imagine. Wool workers had their guild, linen workers had theirs, bronze smiths, silversmiths, leather cutters, dyers, bakers, potters. Each trade organized into its own association. But these weren't secular labor unions in the modern sense. They were deeply religious institutions. Every guild had a patron deity. The silversmiths of Ephesus, for example, were devoted to Artemis, which is why they rioted against Paul in Acts 19. The guild meetings weren't just business networking events. They were worship gatherings. A typical guild meeting would begin with a libation, a liquid offering poured out to the patron god or goddess. Often there would be a second libation to the genius of the emperor, his divine spirit. The communal meal that followed featured meat that had been sacrificed to idols. This is exactly what Jesus condemns in Revelation 2 when he rebukes the churches for tolerating those who eat food sacrificed to idols. Here's where the trap closed on Christians. To work in your trade, you had to belong to the guild. There was no freelancing, no independent contracting outside the system. The guild controlled access to raw materials, regulated quality standards, and managed the marketplace. If you weren't a member, you couldn't function economically. But to be a member, you had to participate in the guild's religious rituals. Pour the libation, eat the sacrificed meat, acknowledge the emperor's divinity. For a follower of Jesus, this was impossible. You cannot call Caesar Lord when Jesus is Lord. You cannot pour offerings to Artemis when you worship the living God. You cannot eat at the table of demons and the table of Christ. Imagine you're a leather worker in Smyrna. Your family has been in this trade for 3 generations. You have a wife and 3 young children depending on your income. One day, you hear the gospel and believe. You're baptized. You belong to Jesus now. Then your next guild meeting arrives. The wine is passed for the libation to Dionysus. The incense is lit for Caesar's spirit. Everyone is watching. Your guild brothers, your suppliers, your customers, they're all waiting for you to participate like you always have. What do you do? If you refuse, you'll be reported. Your membership will be revoked. The leather suppliers, all guild members, won't sell to you anymore. The marketplace officials won't let you set up your stall. Your customers will buy from guild-approved craftsmen instead. Your children will go hungry. Your family will lose everything. Not because of a government mandate, not because of a law, but because the economic system and the religious system were the same system. And you can't participate in one without bowing to the other. This wasn't hypothetical. This was Tuesday for Christians in Asia Minor. The mark of the beast wasn't a microchip implanted under the skin. It was the guild token, the certificate of participation, the proof that you had sacrificed, that you had worshipped, that you belonged to the system. With it, you could buy and sell. Without it, you were economically dead. If this is the historical reality, if the mark was about guild membership and emperor worship and conscious religious allegiance, why do so many Christians today live in fear of barcodes and microchips? Let's address these theories directly, not to mock anyone who has believed them, but to set the record straight. The barcode theory emerged in the 1970s and 1980s. The claim goes like this. If you look at a UPC barcode, you'll notice slightly longer lines at the beginning, middle, and end. These are called guard bars, and visually they look similar to the pattern that encodes the number 6. Therefore, the theory claims, every barcode secretly contains 666. Here's the technical reality. In UPC encoding, every digit is represented by a specific 7-bit binary pattern. The number 6 is encoded as a particular sequence of bars and spaces. The guard bars are encoded as a completely different sequence. They look similar to the human eye, but a scanner reads them as entirely different data. The guard bars are reference points that tell the scanner where the code begins and ends. They don't represent any number at all. There is no hidden 666 in the barcode system. It's a visual coincidence, not a satanic conspiracy. What about microchips and RFID implants? Since the early 2000s, implantable chips have been identified by some as the fulfillment of the Mark prophecy. More recently, concerns have shifted to central bank digital currencies and digital ID systems. Here's what these theories miss. Technology is morally neutral. A chip that unlocks your office door or stores your medical information is a tool. The biblical symbolism of the right hand is drawn from the Old Testament. It represents action, authority, power. It's not a specification for chip placement. In fact, most implanted chips go in the left hand between the thumb and forefinger for practical scanning reasons. More importantly, the mark in Revelation requires conscious worship. It's not something done to you without your knowledge or consent. It's something you choose. If a government ever says, "Deny Christ or lose access to the financial system," that's when the mark mechanism activates. But the technology itself isn't the mark, any more than Roman coins were the mark. Both are tools that a beast-like system can weaponize. But the tool isn't the sin. The allegiance is. During the pandemic, a viral theory claimed that Microsoft patent WO/2020/060606 was proof that Bill Gates planned to mark humanity. The patent describes a system where body activity data could be used to mine cryptocurrency, essentially getting paid to exercise or watch ads. The 060606 in the patent number was assigned automatically by the World Intellectual Property Organization's sequential numbering system. It wasn't chosen by Microsoft. The patent describes external sensors like fitness trackers, not implantable chips. This is a textbook case of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data. Here's the theological error that unites all these theories. They treat the mark as a hidden trap that Christians might stumble into accidentally. You scan the wrong barcode, you accept the wrong chip, you use the wrong currency, and suddenly you're damned forever without even knowing what happened. But Revelation doesn't describe the mark that way at all. Just as the Shema was a conscious daily act of devotion to YHWH, the mark is a conscious act of allegiance to the beast. You cannot accidentally worship. The mark isn't something done to you, it's something you choose. Here's the question these conspiracy theories never answer. If the mark is a hidden trap that deceives even sincere believers, what kind of God would condemn people for being tricked? But if the mark is a deliberate choice, a yes to the beast and a no to Christ, then judgment makes sense. The first interpretation makes God a monster. The second makes him a righteous judge. So what does all this mean? We've traced the evidence. Charagma, not a neutral mark, but a slave brand indicating ownership. The gematria calculation. Nero Caesar equals 666 in Hebrew. The 616 variant, not a contradiction, but confirmation across two languages. The trade guilds, the actual mechanism that made it impossible to buy or sell without religious compromise. The first Christians weren't watching for the mark of the beast. They faced it every single day. Every guild meeting where the wine was poured to pagan gods. Every marketplace transaction where they handled coins stamped with Caesar's face and blasphemous titles. Domitian, the emperor who likely ruled when Revelation was written, demanded to be called Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Those words were on the currency. Every time a Christian bought bread or paid taxes, they held in their hands a piece of metal declaring that a man was God. The mark was never about technology. It was about ownership. Consider what Revelation actually presents. In chapter 7 and chapter 14, the servants of God receive a seal on their foreheads, the name of the Father, marking them as His own. They belong to Him. He protects them. His identity is their identity. The mark of the beast is the counterfeit. Same locations, hand and forehead, opposite meaning. Where God's seal declares, "You are mine and I will keep you," the beast's brand declares, "You are mine and I will use you." Two masters, two kingdoms, two marks, and you can only bear one. This is why Revelation presents the conflict in terms of an unholy trinity. The dragon, Satan himself, mimics God the Father, giving his power and throne to the beast. The beast from the sea mimics God the Son. He even has a mortal wound that was healed, a dark parody of resurrection. The beast from the earth, called the false prophet, mimics the Holy Spirit. He doesn't seek glory for himself, but directs all worship to the first beast, performing signs and wonders to deceive. The mark is the counterfeit baptism, the initiation into the counterfeit kingdom. The brand that says, "I belong to this system. I serve this Lord. I am owned by this power." Nero is dead. Domitian is dead. The Roman Empire fell 16 centuries ago, but the spirit of the beast remains. It lives in any system, political, economic, religious, that demands the absolute loyalty and total allegiance that belong only to Jesus Christ. It rises whenever earthly power claims divine authority. It speaks whenever the choice is framed as compromise or starve. The mark isn't a barcode on a package of cookies. It's the stamp of the world on the human soul, the invisible brand that declares who really owns you. The question was never, "How do I avoid a microchip?" The question was always, "Who owns me?" The Christians in Smyrna and Pergamum and Thyatira knew the cost. They lost their guilds. They lost their income. Some lost their families. Many lost their lives. They chose the Lamb anyway. Not because they were heroes, not because they were stronger than us, because they knew whose they were. The truth about the mark of the beast isn't a conspiracy theory about the future. It's a call to examine the present. What systems demand your ultimate loyalty today? What compromises feel small in the moment, but aren't small at all? What would you lose if you refused to play along? The first Christians lost everything rather than burn a pinch of incense to Caesar. One pinch. A gesture that meant nothing to the Romans, but meant everything to God. What's your pinch of incense? Maybe it's the career advancement that requires you to stay silent about your faith. Maybe it's the social acceptance that costs your convictions one small piece at a time. Maybe it's the comfort that slowly, quietly replaces your first love. Maybe it's the political allegiance that demands a loyalty that looks increasingly like worship. The beast has always been good at making the cost of faithfulness feel impossible, and the price of compromise feel reasonable. Here's the good news. If you belong to Christ, you already bear His seal. The Lamb knows His own. Your name is written in His book. And no beast, ancient or modern, political or economic, obvious or subtle, can snatch you from His hand. The question isn't whether you'll be marked. You already are. The only question is, by whom? The first Christians answered that question with their careers, their communities, and their lives. They're not asking you to face lions in the arena, but they are asking you to remember whose image you bear. What's your pinch of incense? The small compromise that might not be so small. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this changed how you understand Revelation, if it moved you from fear of technology to examination of allegiance, share it with someone who needs to hear it.